Okay, so today's term, as you can see there, is three-term contingency. And I don't usually use this term, but more and more I'm hearing people refer to it. And I got into a couple of discussions in the last 2 weeks where this came up, and I went, oh, no, we gotta get this out there. Three-term contingency. So let's take a look at our actual definition for it. Three-term contingency is the process by which a living entity learns that their behavior in the presence of a stimulus can have an effect on the environment. Well, I'm so glad we cleared that up. I don't know about you, but I feel better, right? I know what this is, and I know what all of these words mean, and this still hurts my head. This is why we do jargon. All right, moving on to our working definition. This is the thing that we refer to all the time on the show as the ABCs of behavior. You probably have heard me talk about Skinner before on the show, because Skinner is really the person who made it so crystal clear about how language develops using behavior. And I think that that's a lot of the reason why people who are BCBAs, board certified behavior analysts, and people who are doing ABA consider Skinner to sort of be, the font from which all good things come from. So Skinner talked specifically about this three-term contingency, that every behavior that anyone has three parts to it. There's an antecedent, which is the A of the ABCs, right? There's a behavior, and then there's a consequence. Everything that you and I do that's behavior, everything that living entities do, our dogs do this, our cats do this, our birds do this, like living things if we can just look at the behavior, right? But if we want to tear it apart and look completely at the behavior, there's something that happens, there's the behavior, and there's the consequence. The example that I always give, because it's one that we can all relate to, is that every single day you and I at some point walk over and turn on a light switch, right? We all do that at some point. Sometimes we do it in the morning, sometimes we don't do it until late at night, but at some point in the day, we all turn on a light switch. So the behavior is turning the light switch on, right? But what's the antecedent that comes before that? And they're not always the same, right? You can turn on a light switch to tick somebody off because they just made you mad, right? You could do that. You could do that just because you were sitting and reading a book and it became hard to see. So you decided you wanted to turn on the light, so you walked over and did the behavior that way. So all behaviors don't have the same, it can be the same behavior, but it can have lots of different antecedents, and behaviors have lots of consequences, right? Usually when we walk over and turn on a light switch, the room is flooded with light, and it takes care of whatever the issue was, which is why we walked over. But sometimes the light switch doesn't work, right? We still engage in the behavior, but the light switch doesn't work. So the consequence of the behavior can be vastly different depending on what the circumstances are. So it's three different variables that we're looking at always in behavior. And here's the power in this, because if you're somebody who is having trouble with anyone, whether it be somebody who is on the autism spectrum or not, let's say you're a teacher and you have a student who's not on the autism spectrum, but they're engaging in a behavior. We always want to change the behavior. We want to get control of the behavior. In fact, that's the kind of language that we use all the time. We got to get that behavior under control. Can't you control your students? Can't you control your kids? And we think that we're trying to control the behavior. But the truth of the matter is that there is almost no way to actually just control the behavior, right? This is where we get into the stupidity, I want to say, but it's really a form of craziness that we've all been someplace with a child or someone else, and we say, stop doing that, stop it, stop doing that. I always think of my child in the doctor's office when he was kicking the chair and me saying, stop doing that, stop. And then if they don't want to, what are you going to do? Right? So then you have to escalate it, and it gets physical. And I remember putting my hand on my son's leg and saying, stop it. Right? But what happens if he doesn't want to do that? if there aren't consequences that are meaningful to him in his brain about that, and he really wants to be kicking the chair, he can continue doing that. And as a parent and as a teacher or as a spouse of a person who is engaged in a behavior that we don't like, what are we going to do? I mean, honestly, what are you going to do? So that's not powerful, looking at the behavior and thinking, I'm going to control that behavior. Where the power is in the antecedent and the consequence. We have tons of control over antecedents. And once we start looking at behavior from that perspective of going, okay, that's the behavior, I'm going to let go of any preconceived notions about the behavior, and I'm going to start thinking about what can I change about the antecedent. Ooh, power. There's all kinds of power. And then the consequences. Oh my goodness, we have tons of things that we can do for consequences. And a lot of times we tend to go to, oh, well, let's do something negative, when that's just not as effective. Where it's effective is in the positive consequences. So I'm a former teacher, and I'm thinking about a teacher who's got a student who's engaging in a behavior. Maybe that student wads up pieces of paper and, spits them, wads up the paper, sticks it in their mouth, and spits it at other kids during a lesson. This is a behavior that no teacher wants, right? And can the teacher actually, what are you going to do? Take the paper away from the kid so that he can't tear it up? How much control do you have over the behavior? You really don't. But the teacher can start to look at why this behavior is happening. In the beginning of looking at why, you have to look at what happens directly before are they only doing that during math class? Are they only doing it after lunch? What are the things that go into building up to the point where the kid is tearing up paper and sticking it in their mouth? Because we can change all that. Maybe it only happens in math class because maybe the kid is nervous about math problems. And maybe we set up a circumstance where we change the antecedent, and when we do math, we say to them, hey, can you be my secretary and come up and write the math problems on the board for me as I'm saying them? Because this kid likes to write on the board, and what we've done is given them a behavior where the paper isn't there. We changed the moment before completely. And now the behavior can't happen because they're not sitting there with their paper, right? And maybe the consequence for that is that they get lots of praise from the teacher about, hey, you're doing such a great job being my secretary. And it could just be praise, or it could be, I'm going to give you this thing that I know that you like doing. Because you did such a good job being my secretary. We build that child up to the point where they don't have the need to tear up the paper. So antecedents and consequences are where the power is. And this is why we need to understand what the 3-term contingency is. It's a powerful, powerful tool if we simply adjust our thinking and take, it's not that the behavior isn't important, but controlling behavior happens by looking at the antecedents and the consequences.